We are doing our life vision statement by God's grace to step forward as God's man or woman in my spheres of influence to serve His purposes for His glory. And today we're looking at spheres of influence, part 2. Last week we talked about work in your career world, and today we're going to talk about your community, which is more than just neighbors, but the places where you have connection with people. Now, there was one fella that was sort of on this, and he wanted to do this. He wanted to act in this way. And so he had a friend that was starting a new business, had a new, or expanding his business to a new location. And he decided it would be cool if the florist would deliver a plant there for the people to walk in, just to kind of freshen up the place. Just kind of a new first impression. And so he called the florist delivered. And his friend, who went to started the new company or new location, was dazzled by the arrangements of flowers. But then he opened the card, and the card said, "Rest in peace." and the florist had signed for the friend, the first name. And the friend was just sort of incensed that something went wrong here. And so he called the florist. And the florist company was like, "Oh, my gosh, I'm so sorry." And he apologized profusely. And he said, I know you're upset by this, but it could be worse. And the fellow said, "Well, how's that?" He said, "Well, right now there's a funeral going on, and the flower bouquet that we sent there says, 'Congratulations on your new home.'" What that tells me is not all of our efforts to step forward as God's man or woman into our spheres of influence go shiningly well. Sometimes things like this happen. There are spheres of influence we talked about last week. It's basically wherever you intersect with people. And generally speaking, the more that you intersect with people in a particular, like at work, for example, or neighbors, then the more opportunities for influences. But then there are other times where you're not around people, like when you go to a restaurant. That's kind of one of my spheres of influence, where I shop. You see these people occasionally, but you can still have influence in their life. So we looked at in your handout, this has to do with marriage as one of your spheres of influence, but not just your spouse, but your married friends usually, or some friends that you have through your marriage. Your family, not just your kids, but your extended family as well, or their friends, your kids' friends. Career, we looked at last week. And then we're going to group a few of these together: neighbors, community, and school. I want you to think about today. And these three elements where you meet with people. And next week, we're going to look at spheres of influence at church. So influence has very little to do with position. That's normally what we think. And influence, generally, I think that most of us tend to think of sort of professional influence. Do I have something to give to somebody else? Do I know more than the person that I'm talking to, and can I help them? Well, there is a place for professional influence. But generally speaking, that is not the kind of influence we're talking about in this series. We're talking about more personal influence and relational influence. This happens through you relationally or personally as people watch you. Influence has to do with sort of you shape the environment around you. You shape the air in the room, the relational air that we breathe. You help to shape values of the people around you. You're sort of like a thermostat rather than a thermometer. If you want a good metaphor for what this is, be a thermostat in your spheres of influence. So we're going to look at, on the inside of your handout, our purpose, which we will be doing in a few weeks, serving God's purpose. I often am sort of shocked when I get on Facebook, and I sort of have one of the senses that there are a lot of people that are trying to live out some element of fulfillment through what they post on Facebook. Now that's not a bad thing. Vacations are not a bad thing, and trips are not a bad thing. I'm not saying that. Those are good things. But what I sense is that we are searching for something that makes sense of life, that answers the questions that I hunger for in my life. And the opposite of that is just sort of particularly as you hit midlife crisis maybe, or a little bit older, is just sort of to hunker down. I'm just sort of passing through. My goal is to make it through the week, kind of life existence. And yet, as a friend of mine has said, as Christians, we are pregnant with purpose. Whatever the job is I have, whether you're working or retired, whatever your situation in life is, wherever you intersect with people, we are a people on purpose. And we will look at this in a few weeks, serving God's purposes. Matthew 5:13, Jesus gives us a great metaphor. You are the salt of the earth. If salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Now, as you know, salt has really two different purposes that it serves. In the Old West, salt was a great preservative. And so settlers could be traveling across the plains of Kansas or Nebraska or into Colorado, and they make their homestead, and they would have a little barn or a little shed where they would keep their meat, venison or cows or sheep or whatever, and they would pack it in salt, and it would last a long time. It's sort of amazing to me that even with a refrigerator, there's sort of an expiration date on how long you can keep meat in there. But with salt, apparently, even during the summer, this could be a long time. So what does that have to do with us, preserving? Well, I think about sort of the atmosphere at work, the reinforcing values at work, or what's good at work, or what somebody does that's upright at work. You have an opportunity to put words to those kinds of things or to demonstrate those kinds of things. And the second thing is that salt adds flavor. It makes something that's sort of bland. Salt, to many of you who know me, salt is the only spice I use. I've tried everything else, and I'm the bland feeding the bland. This type of thing is sort of like, you like that, Jacob? This sort of flavoring is sort of like I think about many homeowners association board meetings, where that is rough. It can be very contentious. Some of the homeowners get very, very upset. And if you sit on a board like this, you have an opportunity to add some flavor to this, to not make this so difficult. Sometimes that's talking with homeowners, or sometimes that's talking with your fellow board members. Or if you're a mom serving on the PTA, you have a chance to have the same type of influence with other people who are serving on the PTA board. When I was a Little League coach for 10 years, I had some tremendous team moms that came alongside. And they didn't just organize, the snacks after the game or work out picture day, or the once a week when we were going to go over to the batting cages. But they also added to the environment of the team. I told our parents that I expect you to be just as respectful and sportsmanlike with the umpires, with the other team, the other managers, as I'm expecting our sons to be. And if you find that difficult, I will come talk with you once. And if it happens again, I'm going to ask you to take your chair down to the left field foul pole and complain to your heart's content. Now, I had some mothers and fathers that picked that flag up with me and were voices of encouragement to umpires, to the other managers, to the boys on the other team. That's influence. Colossians 4:6, let your conversation be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer everyone. He is not talking here about professional influence. He's talking about personal influence and relational influence in our everyday life here. Part of the way we influence people is relationally and personally. When I was a young single man, I'd gone off to the seminary. I was still a pretty young Christian. And I had been influenced greatly by a woman about 10 years older than me. Some of you have met her at some of our women's things in the past, Carolyn Teague. And she was a single woman, and she loved people like nobody I had ever seen in my life, not even close. I was dumbfounded by just observing the way that she related to us and to the people about our age. And I was very convicted about this because it seemed to me that I had a pretty critical heart. I might not verbalize that all that much, but I'm sure that came out in some of my attitudes. And so I heard she was going to be doing a college retreat at Glorieta, New Mexico, a huge Baptist convention center. And I signed up to go on that college retreat, even though I was in grad school and not a college student, just because I wanted to watch Carolyn sort of wield her magic with those students. And so I went, and I was sort of that, what do they call this now when you're a sort of spy on Facebook? No, something worse. Spying on Facebook, or what is that? Stalker. Yes, I might have been I was a stalker before the internet. So I went, and I just sort of hung in the shadows and just watched her relate to these kids. And I was dumbfounded. It was Friday night, Saturday all day, Sunday morning, and then we left to go back to Texas. And the thing that sort of struck me from that was that she acted with anybody she was talking to as if this was the most important person in the world. Didn't matter what their background was, what their Christianity were, lost, saved, any of that stuff. And she was always able to turn the focus on the person she was talking to. She was a really good listener. She asked really good questions. And the people, when they were dialoguing with her, just felt like they mattered. They were valued, and she valued them. And I remember at one point, it might have been Saturday night, going back to my room and just sort of sitting down on the bed and thinking, God, I am a million miles from this. But I want to be this guy. I want to be just like her. Would you help me? Would you build this into me? It was this kind of relational, personal influence. It had a huge effect on me. In your handout, the next little thing I want to talk about is the missing it. And I remember in college, as you know my story, I was looking for the missing it, and I was looking for it in all the different ways that a college student will look for this. And for a couple years, I tried to convince myself that I had about 6 or 7 little its, and when you added them all up together, it was the it. And finally, in my junior year, I began to suspect that all of these little its did not add up to the big it that I was hungering for and searching for. And as you know, that Jesus is the it. And it's not just Jesus generically, but Jesus in relationship. And I really like this verse, John 7:37, where Jesus was in Jerusalem and at the feast, and he says at the end of the feast, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. And he uses this metaphor. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from him. What's he saying to the people? If anyone is thirsty. Now again, the metaphor is water, but he's talking about who we are as humans. There have been times when I have been tremendously thirsty. I was on a hike a number of years ago with some guys in the church, and we didn't take any water with us. It was a hot day. I have never been so thirsty in my life. When you are thirsty or hungry, that has your attention until you do something to quench that thirst, to slake that thirst, or to quiet that hunger. And that's what Jesus is talking about. There is a conscious need that needs some attention, not just with water and thirst, but a human need. And then he says, come. In other words, it's not enough just to go, well, I know that water will slake my thirst, or I know that if I drink some coffee or Diet Coke that I won't be quite as thirsty. It's one thing to know those things, but until I move from my office to the little break room upstairs, or from your cubicle down to the lunchroom, or from the classroom to the cafeteria, you're going to get thirstier until you do something. You have to act. Jesus says, come. And then he says, come to me. This is what I missed my first 2.5 years in college. It's not enough to come to the party on Friday night, or to go to the drunken fest on Saturday night, or to try to sleep with the next pretty girl, or to try to do some kind of sports exploit through intramurals. He says, no, to me. But here, he says, it's not just enough to know this theoretically or theologically, but the last little word here, he says, come to me and drink. And drink. Well, of course we do that when we are physically thirsty. What's he mean here? Well, what he means is it's not enough just to say, well, Jesus, I know that you can quench my thirst and you're my it. We're on the right track. But what am I thirsty for? So sometimes I think, that hunger that I have is just for peace. Jesus, I'm so worried, so anxious about it. This is so stupid. I need you as my peace. Sometimes life is crazy, and I can feel this confusion. I think, God, or Jesus, you are my anchor in the midst of storms. There's something specific that I am hungry and thirsty for. God, Jesus, I need you as my strength. Jesus, I need you to stand up courageously, to get up and speak, even when I wish I didn't have to do that on a given day. In other words, there's something in all of those things. Jesus is the answer, but it's specific things, specific kinds of drinks that I need from that fountain. One of my favorite places to go get a hamburger, which I try to only do once a month, there's a machine that's I don't know what they call it, the drink machine is all I can think of it. And you can get almost any kind of drink you want out of that. I don't know how many different flavors are in that thing. It's a lot. Out of that one machine, you can get lots of different flavors of drinks. That's a metaphor for Jesus for us. The missing it. The missing it is Jesus, more specifically the life of Jesus in us and through us. And how does this sense of influence happen? Well, it seems to me there are three things. How we relate to people is one of the ways this happens, whether at work or in your community, or watching Carolyn relate to students. How we live outwardly is another thing that people observe. And then third, our character, our demeanor, what people sense. I've heard plenty of lost people when they come to Christ say, I didn't know what I was missing, but I knew I didn't have what you had. There was something you had that I didn't have. That's how I came to Christ, was that essence there. Another metaphor is Matthew 5:14. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on the stand. It gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, this is really a shocking verse. The bar here for us Christians is pretty low. He declares to everyone, you are the light of the world. You may feel like a brand new Christian. What do I know? You're included in you. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. That's also a word to every one of us. You may think your light is pretty dim, but not to him. He can use whatever dimness of light there is. Light cannot be hidden in the darkness. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. And here he says, now here's the absurdity of this. Sometimes we just sort of think, I don't know if I have anything to offer. I don't know if I have any light. And Jesus is saying here, that's absurd. You wouldn't light a light and then put something over to cover the light. It's trying to hide the light that Jesus has in us is absurd. Instead, they put it on a stand and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine. This is the step forward process. Step forward in small ways or step forward as a way of life. Let your light shine, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, he says good deeds. But it appears to me that that's sort of a catch-all phrase for actions, but also your attitudes. The attitudes that you bring to the table at church, the attitudes or church event or at your work environment or at a PTA meeting or at a homeowners association meeting. What you value, your words, how you relate to people. Now, I'd like to get really specific here, and if you have a pen or pencil, or if you are have your phone, I want you to think about specific people in your community. Names and faces. Who are the people God has brought into your life? So one of them is neighbors. There may be some names that come to mind. There may be some neighbors you haven't met yet. And maybe something of what you'll do is step forward to meet that neighbor. I'm so sorry, we've been living here for 5 years. I still have not met you. My bad. Tell me your name. A second one is people you know through youth sports like Little League Baseball, ASO soccer, etc. A few years ago, I was at Seattle's Coffee up at Culver and Walnut, what used to be there, and I was getting my coffee fixed one evening, and there were 3 young adults there also getting their coffee fixed. And they were talking to each other, a guy and 2 girls, and suddenly the guy said, "Hey, Coach Seth, do you remember me?" And I looked up, and it was a fellow that I coached in senior minors, which was ages 13 and 14. Name was Chase. And I didn't recognize him at first because he was now about 10 years beyond that. And Chase, oh my gosh, what are you doing now? He was driving a tank out in Yuma for desert practice out there. And we had a chance to catch up. I went back to fixing my coffee, and then I heard one of the girls say, "Hey, Coach Seth, do you remember me?" And I looked up. Again, 10 years had passed, maybe a little bit longer for these next 2 girls, but I had coached them in girls soccer. And I didn't look at the third person until she said, "Hey, Coach, do you remember me?" Now, what struck me about that little interaction was not just that I'd had a place in their life 10 years before, but their question, "Do you remember me? Do you remember me?" This is part of that that we're all looking for, that kind of connection. And you and I have a chance to give them a taste of that. A third one, and so, or another one I ran into a few years ago, or a few years after that. He was a catcher on my Little League team during the majors, which is when the Little League teams go to the World Series, have a chance to go to the World Series. And the year before, he had been on a really bad team and was pretty discouraged. And I inherited that team the next year to try to do something with it. And he had a great year. Loved playing baseball. We had a great season. But after we were all done, we had our team party. I asked the boys, "Tell me the thing that you enjoyed most about being on our team." You know what he said? He said, "Coach, I loved it when you had us line up after the game and shake the umpire's hand." Now, if you've ever been to Little League games, there are some mothers and fathers that think it's their sworn duty to jump on the umpire. And these people are really not paid that much to do what they do. So imagine what happens when one of the team's kids are lining up to shake the umpire's hand. What happens to the adults sitting there? There's influence that happens there. There's something of salt, of preserving and adding flavor to it. Third, people you know at school, either as a student or if you have children at school, people you know at their school, like PTA. School plays, practices, helping in the classroom. Are there people that are coming to mind? Jot that down. Make a note of that. These are people that God has put in your life and you have an opportunity to have an influence with. A lot of you know that I've done a patriotic program at what used to be El Camino School until they moved over to Woodbury since Christy was 6 years old. Except for the year they moved and for COVID, we didn't do it. But that involved going over to the school about 7 or 8 practices for about an hour, playing my guitar, teaching them about 10 patriotic songs, second graders, and telling them the history of the songs the American history of these songs. There's some great history in these songs. And then the parents come for the performance, and usually at that performance, the auditorium is bigger than our auditorium, and it is wall-to-wall people, standing room only. And they start coming early to get a seat, about 8 o'clock. Performance is at 8:30. Between 8 and 8:30, I have a chance to tell the adults the history of some of these patriotic songs. This is not rocket science. Thankfully, I have a flexible schedule that can do this. But that is influence in terms of not just with teachers, not just with the kids, with the parents, but with, I've got to know about 15 second grade teachers over the years. On the next area, regular places you visit and shop. Grocery store, drugstore clerks, the wait staff at restaurants and coffee shops, places you shop. Now, one of the nice things about this is that the people there generally wear a name tag. So it's not hard to call them by name. But even with that, sometimes they don't wear their name tag. And so in my little iPhone, I have a notes section. And I have a notes section for some of the different restaurants that I go to and some of the different places that I shop. I've got one for our bank, a couple places get gas. And I just jot down the names of the people that I have met there and something about them. Now, at some places, you have a chance to have a little bit more of a conversation. How long have you worked here? What brought you to this place? What do you see in your future? What are you going to do for the Super Bowl? It's just taking an interest in people, asking them questions, and have a chance. Because who else does this? This light shines because there's darkness with most people when they're going to complain about something. Letter E, youth activities, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Taekwondo, classes, etc. My mother was a Cub Scout mom for a year. I think 1 year was plenty for her. She was kind of like, no, this is way more. Our own Michelle Sam told me that she baked bread for a neighbor. Went over, talked to the neighbor, and bread, and this lady was dumbfounded by this. It made a difference with her. That somebody cared about her enough to do something and to step forward to give that. I mentioned last week about baking cookies and brownies for some friends, and they went on to live a healthy life anyway. For years, on Thanksgiving Day, Mindy would buy these little house plants and take them to some of our neighbors. And just a little note, we're thankful that you're one of our neighbors. It's just simple, simple. Making a phone call to see how somebody's doing. Volunteering at school functions or like a PTA event. Volunteering in your child's classroom. Get to know other moms and dads there. Volunteer to be an assistant coach or a team mom on a Little League team. Ask your child's teacher if there's something you can do to make their life a little bit better. Just the question, just the interest is influence. Volunteer to wash an elderly person's car in your neighborhood. Ask a neighbor over for a Saturday lunch. Invite several people to do a movie and a dessert night. Simple dinner. Invite people, or go down to the park and play basketball on Saturday morning at a local park. Meet some guys there. If you exercise, some of you walk. We've had ladies in our church who have done walks with other people in their neighborhood. You can walk. A few of you have joined a pickleball club to meet people. Tip generously whenever you're at a place where you go. The last 2 times I've had my hair cut, I had a lady from Iran who cut my hair. And I think that the charge, it's like Fantastic Sam, so it's pretty cheap. It's like $20. I tipped her $25. And when she looked at the credit card receipt, she did a double take. And she was like, wow, are you sure? I said, yes, I'm very grateful for you. It's not easy to make an old man look decent. She got a chuckle out of that. I had my hair done, again, same lady, a couple weeks ago, and gave her the same kind of tip. And this time, this woman from Iran looked at me, and she sort of melted. And she said, "You are a sweet man." Now, the tip provided the front door, but there was more influence than just that. And that had to do with our conversation while she was cutting my hair. Invite some people over for, we had a neighbor that used to do this July 4th cookout. He would tell everybody, if you want to bring a barbecue, you can bring a barbecue, but I'll have mine out there. Everybody in our little cul-de-sac, bring your meat you want to do. You cook it on the barbecue. And then he would ask people to bring a dish. He'd set up a little portable table, had a cooler with drinks in it. And it was just fun. Everybody just put their lawn chairs out in the middle of the cul-de-sac, and we just enjoyed. It was simple. Simple, simple, simple. I have a hamburger place that I go to, and there have been a few years where on Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, I've gotten a plant over at Ralph's and taken it over there because 3 of the ladies that I've gotten to know over the years, I think are all single. And I just take it over there with their name on it, thinking about you today, have each of their names on it, love, Seth. And it goes on the bar area. And when I've gone in there, it stays more than just a couple days. It's simple. Simple influence. Calling people by name. Or something you can do. All right, so what comes to your mind? We're all going to walk out of here after lunch. And I wonder what we're going to do. What are you going to do? If I had a magic wand, it would be one thing. What's one thing? One thing you can do. Not talking about the hardest thing, the most doable, the easiest. Just get started. Do you have a face in mind? A name? An action? Let's pray together. Father, as we finish this, I am reminded of people who have had influence in my life. Thinking about my roommate for my junior year, who I gave a hard time because he was a Christian, and I riled him up pretty good sometimes, and yet he was faithful, consistent, loving to me in spite of me. I think about Harold and Deborah, first time that they had me over to eat, 50-something years ago. I can still remember what she cooked. Ham, glazed carrots, buttered green beans. A simple dinner. People who have taken an interest in my life. People who have encouraged me. People who have asked me questions. People who want to get to know me. And you've given me opportunities to do that with people. Father, we are, as your people, pregnant with purpose. We are doing more than just passing through, getting through the week to the weekend. But in the midst of all that, somehow, some way, you want to use our life as a light and salt. Help us to step forward as your people into our spheres of influence. This week, at least with one person. Remind us of this. Help us to see the value. Help us to see that you are at work no matter how dimly we think our light is.